At Thanksgiving dinner, my father handed me an envelope in front of 15 guests. I thought it was a peace offering. Instead, it was a bribe to leave the state forever. My sister pulled out her phone to record my humiliation. She wanted tears. What she got was a smile that cost our family everything they owned. My name is Tasha, and for 29 years my family treated me like a mistake they were too polite to erase. Before I tell you how I turned their cruelty into my empire, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who eventually bought the whole farm. Growing up in the exclusive Buckhead district of Atlanta meant that appearances were the only currency that mattered. My father, Dr. Luther Robinson, was a retired surgeon who treated his children like trophies on a shelf. My mother, Catherine, was a former beauty queen who believed a wrinkle was a moral failing. And then there was my sister Candace. Beautiful, ambitious, and completely hollow. They were the picture of black excellence. And I was just Tasha, the quiet one, the one who dropped out of law school to write, the one they whispered about at church. Last Thursday was Thanksgiving, and the air in our colonial mansions smelled of roasted sage, expensive perfume, and judgment. The dining room was suffocating. The crystal chandelier was bright enough to interrogate a suspect, and that is exactly how I felt sitting at the end of the mahogany table. 15 people were crowded around, my aunts, uncles, and my father's business partners. They were all laughing, clinking crystal glasses filled with wine that cost more than my car. I sat in silence, staring at my plate. I was wearing a simple black blazer and slacks. To them, I looked like I had dressed from a discount rack. They did not know the blazer was vintage Yves Saint Laurent, and the slacks were tailored in Milan. They saw what they wanted to see: a failure. The conversation buzzed around me, but never included me. My brother-in-law Gavin was loud and already tipsy. He was sitting next to Candace bragging about some real estate deal he was closing. He kept making subtle digs about how the neighborhood was changing, how he was helping to clean up the inner city. I kept my mouth shut. I focused on cutting my turkey, trying to become invisible. But invisibility was not on the menu that night. Suddenly, the sound of a spoon tapping against a crystal glass sliced through the chatter. Clink, clink, clink. The room went silent instantly. My father stood up at the head of the table. He smoothed his silk tie and buttoned his suit jacket. He looked every inch the patriarch. He smiled that practiced smile he used for hospital donors. He thanked everyone for coming, for celebrating another year of prosperity. Then his eyes landed on me. The warmth in his face vanished instantly. It was like a shutter coming down. "I have a special announcement," he said, his voice booming slightly. "It concerns my youngest daughter, Tasha." My stomach tightened, but my face remained impassive. I saw my mother sip her wine, her eyes gleaming with something that looked disturbingly like anticipation. My sister Candace pulled out her phone. She held it under the table at first, then boldly lifted it up, aiming the camera lens right at my face. She wanted to capture this. My father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He did not hand it to me. He slid it across the polished wood table. It spun slowly and stopped right next to my water glass. All 15 pairs of eyes were glued to that envelope. "Open it, Tasha," he commanded. His voice was smooth but heavy. It was not a request. I picked it up. My hands did not shake. I refused to let them see me tremble. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the contents. Inside was a cashier check and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded the paper first. It was a flight itinerary, a one-way ticket to Phoenix, Arizona, departing at 6 in the morning tomorrow. Then I looked at the check. $15,000. I looked up at him, confused. The silence in the room was deafening. My father spoke loud enough for the neighbors to hear. He said, "Tasha, your mother and I have been talking. We love you, but we cannot keep enabling you. Here in Atlanta, among high achievers, you are struggling to find your footing. You are nearly 30 years old, doing freelance data entry, driving a beat-up car. You are becoming a burden on the family reputation." He actually used the word burden. I heard a gasp from one of the guests, but it was quickly stifled. He continued looking around the table as if seeking validation. He said Arizona has a much lower cost of living. It is more suited to someone with your limited skill set and income bracket. We have arranged for you to stay in a motel for 2 weeks. With this money, you can find a small apartment and get a job in retail or service. You can actually afford to live there. It is a fresh start. A chance for you to stop embarrassing yourself and us. I felt the blood rush to my ears. It was not shame. It was pure cold rage. I looked around the table waiting for someone to object, waiting for an uncle or an aunt to say that kicking a daughter out during Thanksgiving dinner was cruel. But no one moved. My Aunt Sheila covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Uncle Marcus nodded solemnly, as if my father was doing a charitable deed. They all agreed. To them, I was just Tasha, the failure. Candace zoomed in with her camera. I could see the red recording light blinking. She whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Take it, Tasha. 15 grand is like 2 years of salary for you. Don't be ungrateful." My mother chimed in from the other end of the table. Her voice was sweet, dripping with poison. She said, "Think of it as a severance package, honey. We just want you to be where you belong. And you clearly do not belong at this table." Severance package. As if I were an employee being fired. I looked at the check again. $15,000. It was an insult. I made that much in 2 days of passive income from my investments. They thought they were banishing a beggar. They had no idea they were declaring war on a queen. I slowly folded the check and placed it into my pocket along with the ticket. I took a deep breath. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I looked my father dead in the eye. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the bucket. I asked him calmly if he wanted me to leave immediately. He nodded and took a sip of his wine. He said yes. He said, "Your bags are already packed by the housekeeper. They are by the front door. I want you gone before dessert is served. We have a magazine photographer coming next week to shoot the house, and frankly, having you here complicates the aesthetic." I stood up. I smoothed my vintage blazer. I looked at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. I told him thank you. I told him I would take the money. I said, "I appreciate the push, Dad. You are right. I do not belong at this table." Candace snickered, lowering her phone, satisfied that she got the footage of my defeat. My father looked relieved, turning back to his guests to propose a toast to family unity. I turned and walked away from the table. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Each step took me further away from their toxicity. I walked to the front door where my battered suitcases were waiting. But as I reached for the handle, I stopped. I touched the pocket where the check lay. They thought this was the end of me. They thought they had shipped me off to disappear in the desert, but they did not know what I had done earlier that morning. They did not know that while they were preparing the turkey, I was on the phone with my broker. They did not know that by accepting this check, my father had just sealed his own fate, because he had absolutely no idea that the daughter he was exiling was actually the one who held the deed to the very roof over his head. And Arizona, I was never going to Arizona. I was just moving to the other side of the chessboard. The red recording light on my sister Candace's phone blinked like a digital eye, unblinking and predatory. She held the device steady with a manicured hand. Her nails painted a shade of crimson that matched the blood she was metaphorically drawing from my dignity. She did not just want me out of the house, she wanted content. She needed to feed the beast of her social media following, and nothing performs better than a heartwarming story of a wealthy family rescuing their black sheep sibling. Candace adjusted her posture, tilting her chin up to catch the best light from the chandelier. I watched her transformation in real time. The sneer she had worn moments ago vanished, replaced by a soft, benevolent expression that she had perfected during her campaign for city council. "Say thank you, Tasha," she cooed, her voice pitched an octave higher than normal. It was her camera voice, sickly sweet and entirely fake. She zoomed in on the check in my hand, making sure the amount was visible to her 5,000 followers. Look at this, everyone. My parents are literally saints. $15,000 to help my struggling little sister get back on her feet in Arizona. We believe in second chances even when people make bad life choices. She moved the phone closer to my face, invading my personal space. I could smell the expensive white wine on her breath. Come on, Tasha. She prodded, her smile tightening at the edges. Say something. Tell everyone how grateful you are. That is 15 grand. That is like 2 years of your salary with those little typing jobs you do. Most people would kill for this kind of safety net. I felt a sudden, sharp urge to laugh. It bubbled up in my chest, hot and dangerous. 2 years of salary. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Candace thought $15,000 was a fortune to me. She had no idea that I had wired triple that amount to a contractor just yesterday for renovations on a commercial complex I had acquired in downtown Atlanta. To her, I was Tasha, the destitute data entry clerk. To the IRS and a select group of high-net-worth investors, I was the silent partner behind Phantom Inc. Ventures. But I did not laugh. Not yet. I needed to play my part. If she wanted a show, I would give her a performance, but it would not be the one she expected. I looked directly into the camera lens. I let my face relax. I did not give her the tears she was hunting for. I did not give her the shame of a charity case. Instead, I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate curling of my lips. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives before it snaps its jaws shut. I saw Candace falter for a split second behind the screen. She saw something in my eyes that did not fit her narrative. Confidence. Cold, hard amusement. I lifted the check, holding it up like a trophy. Then with slow, precise movements, I folded it in half. Then in half again. I tucked it securely into the inner pocket of my black blazer. Thank you, Candace, I said, my voice steady and clear. Thank you for recording this. Please make sure you save that video. It is always good to have digital evidence of exactly how this transaction went down. Do not delete it. Candace blinked, confused by my tone. It sounded less like gratitude and more like a legal warning. She ended the recording abruptly, her thumb hitting the stop button with a little too much force. The benevolent mask dropped instantly. The sweet sister vanished and the bully returned. She lowered the phone and took a step closer to me, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper so our parents at the other end of the table would not hear. What are you smiling at, you little weirdo? She hissed. Her eyes darted over my outfit, scanning me from head to toe with open disgust. You think you are clever? You are pathetic. Look at you. You are wearing a blazer from a thrift store to Thanksgiving dinner. She reached out and flicked the lapel of my jacket. It was a dismissive, demeaning gesture. I bet you dug this out of a bin at Goodwill, she sneered. It smells like mothballs and failure. Arizona is going to be perfect for you. You can wear your rags there and no one will care because they will be just as poor as you are. I looked down at where her finger had touched my jacket. She thought it was Goodwill. She saw black fabric and assumed it was cheap because she believed I was cheap. She did not recognize the cut of the shoulder. She did not know the feel of vintage Yves Saint Laurent wool crepe. I had bought this blazer at an auction in Paris 3 years ago. It had belonged to a famous jazz singer from the 60s. I paid $4,000 for it, and then another $1,000 to have it tailored to fit me perfectly. My entire outfit cost more than the engagement ring Gavin had bought her. But wealth, real wealth, whispers. It does not scream like the logo-covered monstrosities Candace liked to wear. I brushed the spot she had touched, as if wiping away dirt. You are right, Candace, I said softly. I should probably upgrade my wardrobe. Maybe I will ask for fashion tips from your campaign manager. Oh wait, did he not quit last week because his paycheck bounced? Candace recoiled as if I had slapped her. Her face went pale beneath her heavy contouring. How did you know that? She whispered, panic flaring in her eyes. That is confidential campaign information. I shrugged, maintaining that unsettling smile. People talk, especially when they are waiting in line at the unemployment office. I did not tell her the truth. I did not tell her that her campaign manager was actually my cousin on my father's side, a man the family ignored, and that I had been secretly paying his rent for 6 months because Candace refused to pay him a living wage. I did not tell her that I knew exactly how deep in debt her campaign was. She glared at me, trying to regain her footing. You are lying. You are just trying to get under my skin because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me. Dad loves me. Mom is proud of me. You are just the mistake they are finally correcting. She turned her back on me, flipping her hair over her shoulder. She marched back to her seat next to Gavin, who was busy refilling his wine glass. I watched her show the video to Gavin. They both laughed. I could see Gavin shaking his head, probably making a joke about how I looked like a deer in headlights. Let them laugh. Let them edit the video. Let them post it to Facebook and Instagram. Every view, every like, every comment would just be another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. I patted the pocket where the check lay. $15,000. It was legally a gift now. But the flight ticket, that was going into the trash the moment I walked out the door. I looked at my parents one last time. My father was carving more turkey, looking relieved that the unpleasant business was done. My mother was signaling the catering staff to clear the plates. They had successfully exorcised the demon. They had cut off the dead weight, or so they thought. As I turned to leave the dining room, I caught my reflection in the large hallway mirror. I did not look like a failure. I looked like a CEO who had just completed a hostile takeover, and the board of directors did not even know they had been fired yet. Candace thought she had captured my lowest moment on camera. In reality, she had just filmed her own demise, and the best part was she was going to broadcast it to the world for me. I walked out of the dining room, the sound of their laughter fading behind me, and stepped into the cool hallway. The game had officially begun. Gavin was on his fourth glass of the vintage Cabernet my father had opened, and the alcohol was stripping away whatever thin veneer of politeness he usually maintained. He sat back in his chair, loosening his tie, looking like a man who believed he owned the room simply by existing in it. My brother-in-law was 35, worked in mid-level finance, and had an inflated sense of his own importance that was only matched by his ignorance. He liked to hear himself talk, and unfortunately, tonight my family was a captive audience. He started bragging about his latest project, a development deal in the West End. It was a historic neighborhood, the heart of the Black community in Atlanta for decades, but to Gavin it was just lines on a spreadsheet. He waved his hand dismissively as he spoke about the residents living there. It is a gold mine, really, he said, his words slurring slightly. You just have to clear out the debris. And by debris, I mean the old tenants. They are holding back progress. We are going to bulldoze those rundown shacks and put up luxury mixed-use condos. It is urban renewal. We are doing them a favor, really. Cleaning up the streets. I tightened my grip on my fork. The way he said cleaning up made my skin crawl. He was talking about displacing families who had lived there for generations, people like my grandmother, and he discussed it with the casual arrogance of someone who had never worried about making rent in his life. My father nodded along, captivated by the buzzwords of profit and development, ignoring the underlying disrespect for our history. To my father, green was the only color that mattered, and Gavin promised a lot of green. Gavin paused to take a heavy gulp of wine, and his watery blue eyes drifted across the table to land on me. He smiled, but it was not kind. It was the smirk of a predator looking at wounded prey. He clearly felt the need to leverage my humiliation to boost his own ego. You know, Tasha, you should really look at this Arizona thing as a blessing, he said, pointing his wineglass at me. I stayed silent, waiting. Seriously, he continued, leaning forward. The job market out there is very forgiving. I have a buddy in Phoenix who owns a chain of convenience stores. Not glamorous, obviously. You would be stocking shelves scanning lottery tickets. But it is honest work. And let's be real, it is probably more your speed. They do not require advanced degrees or, actual business acumen. He chuckled at his own joke. My sister Candace giggled beside him, resting her hand on his arm, as if he had just said something profoundly witty. You could even be a manager in 5 or 10 years, Gavin added, feigning generosity. If you apply yourself, it is a low barrier to entry, perfect for someone starting over with nothing. The table remained quiet, waiting for me to hang my head in shame. They expected me to shrink. They expected the old Tasha, the one who stuttered when challenged, the one who apologized for taking up space. But that Tasha had died the moment my father slid that envelope across the table. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I set it down without making a sound. I looked directly at Gavin, my expression completely neutral. That is interesting advice, Gavin, I said, my voice calm and steady. Speaking of low barriers to entry, I was actually curious about that West End project you mentioned. The Sterling Heights development, right? Gavin blinked, surprised that I knew the name of the project. Yeah, Sterling Heights. What about it? I leaned back in my chair, mirroring his posture. I heard you were having trouble securing the mezzanine financing for the second phase. Is that true? The room went deadly silent. My father stopped chewing. Gavin froze his glass halfway to his mouth. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. I continued pressing the advantage. I mean, considering the projected capitalization rate is only 4% and the debt service coverage ratio is hovering around 1.1, it seems like an incredibly risky leverage play. Unless, of course, you have found a secondary lender willing to overlook the zoning violations on the north parcel. Have you? Gavin stared at me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. These were not terms a data entry clerk would know. These were not things you picked up stocking shelves. I was speaking the language of high finance, and I was speaking it better than he did. He swallowed hard, looking around the table nervously. How do you know about the zoning issues? That is internal data. I did not answer his question. I just kept my eyes locked on his. And what about the bridge loan that is due next month? I asked softly. Did you manage to refinance that? Or are you banking on the pre-sales covering the balloon payment? Because from what I read in the public filings, your pre-sales are lagging by 40%. Sweat broke out on Gavin's forehead. He looked at my father, then at Candace, looking for help. He was drowning, and I was the only one who saw the water rising. For a moment, I thought he might actually confess. I thought he might break down and admit that he was over-leveraged, that he was terrified that he had been lying to my family about his success for months. But his ego was too big for that. Survival instinct kicked in. He let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded like barking. He slammed his hand on the table, shaking the silverware. "Listen to her," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. He looked around at the guests, desperate to turn the tide. Listen to Tasha. She must have spent all night on Google trying to memorize big words. Mezzanine financing cap rates. That is cute, Tasha. Really cute. He turned to my father. She probably read a Wikipedia article on real estate and thinks she is a Wall Street tycoon now. Stick to typing, Tasha. Leave the big deals to the men who actually know how the world works. Candace jumped in immediately, sensing her husband's distress. Oh my God, Tasha, stop trying to sound smart. It is embarrassing. You do not even know what those words mean. You are just repeating things you heard on the news to try and make Gavin look bad. My father chuckled, shaking his head as he went back to his meal. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, Tasha, he said condescendingly. Do not try to lecture Gavin on his own business. He is a professional. You are... Well, you are you. The tension broke. The guests laughed. They laughed because it was easier to believe that I was a fraud than to accept that Gavin was a failure. They laughed because the hierarchy of our family demanded that I be the bottom and Gavin be the top. Gavin wiped his forehead with a napkin, his confidence slowly returning now that the pack had backed him up. Yeah, stick to the convenience stores, Tasha, he sneered, pouring himself more wine. Leave the math to us. I watched him drink. I watched my father smile at his son-in-law with pride. I watched my sister beam at her husband, completely unaware that he was gambling away her future. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel humiliated. As I looked at Gavin, red-faced and sloppy, terrified of a woman he considered beneath him, I felt the coldest emotion of all: pity. I pitied him because he had no idea that the secondary lender he was praying for, the mysterious investor who held the fate of his bridge loan in their hands, was sitting right across the table from him. He thought I was using Google. He did not know I was the one reading his loan applications. He thought he had dodged a bullet. He did not realize the gun was already pressed against his temple, and I was just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. I picked up my water again and took another sip. Let them laugh, let them enjoy the joke, because when the punchline finally landed, nobody at this table would be smiling. The massive roasted turkey was placed in the center of the table like a golden idol. Steam curled up from the crispy skin, carrying the scent of rosemary and thyme, but all I could smell was the suffocating perfume of deception. My father stood up to carve the bird, wielding the knife with the same surgical precision he used to cut people out of his life. He sliced through the meat, serving thick, juicy portions to Gavin, to Candace, to the wealthy business partners who were busy complimenting the centerpiece. When he got to me, he paused. He placed a small, dry piece of white meat on my plate, almost as an afterthought. It was a subtle gesture, but in my family, subtlety was how we drew blood. I picked up my fork, intending to eat quickly and leave as commanded. But before I could take a bite, my mother Catherine cleared her throat. She was sitting at the opposite end of the table, looking like royalty in her emerald silk dress and a string of pearls that cost more than my first car. She caught my eye and crooked a manicured finger, beckoning me. "Tasha, honey," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, loud enough for the guests to hear. "Come here for a second. Your collar is crooked. You know how I feel about sloppiness at the dinner table." The guests smiled warmly. They saw a doting mother caring for her youngest child. They saw a scene from a heartwarming holiday movie. I knew better. I knew that specific tilt of her head. I knew the tightness in her jaw that she tried to hide behind a coat of expensive foundation. This was not a gesture of affection. This was a summons. I stood up, feeling the eyes of the room on my back. Candace smirked into her wineglass, knowing exactly what was coming. I walked the length of the long mahogany table, my heels sinking into the plush Persian rug. When I reached my mother, she did not fix my collar right away. Instead, she gripped my arm. Her fingers, adorned with diamond rings, dug into my bicep with surprising strength. She pulled me away from the table, guiding me toward the hallway alcove just out of earshot of the guests, but still visible enough to maintain the illusion of intimacy. She turned her back to the dining room, blocking me from view. The smile dropped from her face instantly. It was like watching a wax figure melt, revealing the steel frame beneath. Her eyes, usually so composed, were narrowed in cold, hard irritation. She reached out and flicked the lapel of my vintage blazer, the same one Candace had mocked earlier. She looked at the fabric with unmasked disgust, as if I were wearing a garbage bag. "Look at you," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You look like a charity case. I told you to dress appropriately for this dinner. We have important people here, Tasha. Investors, council members. And you show up looking like you just clocked out of a shift at a dollar store." I pulled my arm away from her grip. "I dressed formally, Mother. This is a designer blazer." She rolled her eyes. "It is old, Tasha. It looks tired, just like you. And that is exactly the problem." She took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her Chanel No. 5 was overwhelming. She lowered her voice even further, ensuring that only I could hear the cruelty she was about to unleash. "Do you want to know the real reason your father gave you that check? Do you think we just suddenly cared about your cost of living in Arizona?" I stayed silent, holding her gaze. I knew there was more. There was always more. "Next week," she said, emphasizing every word. "Black Enterprise magazine is coming here. They are doing a 6-page spread on our family, the Robinson legacy. They want to feature us as the face of modern generational wealth in Atlanta. They want shots of the house, the cars, and the family. She paused, letting the words sink in. She looked me up and down, her eyes scanning me like a quality control inspector, looking for a defect on an assembly line. I have spent 40 years building this image, Tasha. 40 years of hosting the right parties, joining the right boards, marrying the right man. This photo shoot is the crown jewel. It is going to launch Candace's political career into the stratosphere. It is going to solidify your father's legacy. She reached out and smoothed a wrinkle on my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like she was trying to wipe me away. And I simply cannot have you in those pictures, she said coldly. You do not fit the aesthetic, Tasha. You have no husband, no title, no career that sounds impressive in a caption. You are awkward. You look plain. If you are in those photos, the readers will wonder what went wrong. They will look at Candace, then look at you, and they will ask questions. I cannot have a question mark in my perfect statement. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing my heart. I had always known my mother was vain. I had always known she preferred Candace. But hearing it laid out so clinically was a different kind of pain. She was not sending me away because I was a financial burden. She was exiling me because I was an aesthetic inconvenience. I was a stain on her picture-perfect life, and she was trying to Photoshop me out of existence. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked for a trace of guilt, a flicker of hesitation. There was none. Only annoyance that I was still standing there. So, that is it, I asked, my voice steady, despite the trembling inside me. You are kicking me out of the state because you want a better photo for a magazine. You care more about a glossy page than your own daughter. Catherine sighed, adjusting her pearl necklace. She looked bored. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Tasha. It is not just a photo. It is our brand. It is about excellence. Everyone in this family strives for excellence except you. You are content to be mediocre, and frankly, your mediocrity is contagious. I need you gone so the rest of us can shine without having to dim our light to accommodate your shadow. She leaned in her face inches from mine. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. You are a flaw, Tasha. A blemish on this family's resume. And when you are building a masterpiece, you do not keep the mistakes. You erase them. Arizona is me being kind. I am giving you a chance to be mediocre somewhere else, where no one knows your last name is Robinson. The words hung in the air between us. You are a flaw, a blemish, a mistake. For years I had chased her approval. I had gotten good grades, I had stayed out of trouble. I had tried to be the good daughter. I realized in that moment that I could have won a Nobel Peace Prize, and it would not have mattered. To Catherine Robinson, love was conditional, and the condition was perfection. I had failed the moment I decided to be myself instead of a clone of her. Something inside me snapped, but it was not a break. It was a release. The final tether that held me to this woman, the desperate need for her love, finally severed. I felt lighter. I felt free. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I did not see a queen. I saw a terrified, insecure woman who was so empty inside she had to fill herself with magazine clippings and other people's envy. I took a step back. I brushed off the shoulders she had touched, mimicking her earlier gesture of disgust. I understand perfectly, Mother, I said. My voice was calm, dangerously calm. You want a perfect picture. You want the Robinson legacy to remain untarnished. She nodded, mistaking my resignation for obedience. Exactly. I knew you would understand eventually. Now go back to the table, finish your dinner quickly, and go pack. I do not want to see you tomorrow morning. She turned her back on me and walked back toward the dining room. I watched her transformation as she crossed the threshold. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile returned, and she instantly became the gracious hostess again. She sat down next to my father, whispered something in his ear, and they both laughed. I stood in the shadows of the hallway for a moment. My mother wanted a perfect picture. She wanted to erase the flaw. She had no idea that by trying to erase me, she had just highlighted the cracks in her own foundation. She was worried about a magazine spread. She should have been worried about the deed to her house. I looked at the family portrait hanging on the wall above the side table. It was taken 5 years ago. Everyone was smiling. I was in the back half obscured by Candace's voluminous hair. I reached out and touched the glass. "You want excellence, Mother," I whispered to the empty hallway. "I will show you excellence. I will show you exactly what the flaw is capable of." I turned and walked back into the dining room. I did not sit down to eat the dry turkey. I walked to my chair, picked up my water glass, and prepared to watch them choke on their own lies. The magazine crew could come next week, but by the time they arrived, the locks on the front door would already be changed. I walked back into the dining room, the sound of my heels muffled by the thick Persian rug. The atmosphere had shifted slightly. The tension from the earlier announcement had dissipated, replaced by the warm, boozy haze of expensive wine and self-congratulation. My father Luther was holding court at the head of the table. He had unbuttoned his suit jacket, expansive and relaxed-looking, every bit the successful patriarch he pretended to be. He was in the middle of a story, gesturing broadly, with a crystal goblet of Pinot Noir. The guests were leaning in their faces masks of polite fascination. I slipped back into my seat silently. My water glass was still there, sweating condensation onto the white tablecloth. I picked it up, feeling the cool glass against my fingertips, grounding me. "I am thinking of naming her the Neptune," my father boomed, his voice rich with pride. 45 feet, Italian leather interior, twin-turbo diesel engines. I saw the specs last week at the boat show in Fort Lauderdale. It is not just a boat. It is a statement. A floating testament to what hard work and vision can achieve. The table erupted in appreciative murmurs. My uncle Marcus, who had been nodding along sycophantically all night, raised his glass. "To the Neptune," he toasted, "and to the man who steers the ship of this family through calm and stormy seas alike." My mother Catherine beamed from her end of the table. She had recovered completely from our encounter in the hallway. Her mask was back in place, flawless and impenetrable. "That sounds wonderful, Luther," she cooed. "We can take it down to the Keys for Christmas. Imagine the photo shoot we could do on the deck at sunset. It would be perfect for the magazine spread." I watched them. I watched the way they fed off each other's delusions. It was a masterclass in denial. Here was a man who had just exiled his daughter to save $15,000, talking about buying a vessel that cost $500,000. The math did not add up. It never did in this house. But in the Robinson household, math was subject to opinion, while image was absolute fact. I took a slow sip of water. The ice clinked softly against the glass. It was a tiny sound, but in the brief lull of conversation, it was audible. I set the glass down. "That is ambitious, Dad," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. My father paused his glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and surprise, as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. "Excuse me," he asked, his eyes narrowing. I looked at him, my expression perfectly pleasant. "I said that is ambitious, especially considering the current interest rates," he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Interest rates are a concern for the middle class, Tasha. People at our level operate differently. We leverage assets. We do not worry about a few percentage points." I nodded slowly, pretending to digest this wisdom. "Right. Leverage. Is that why you refinanced this house again last month?" The silence that followed was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. The clinking of silverware stopped. The murmurs died. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. My father froze. His face went from flush to a pale, sickly gray in the span of a heartbeat. He lowered his wine glass slowly, his hand trembling just enough to cause the red liquid to ripple. "What did you say?" he whispered. His voice was dangerous, low and menacing. I did not blink. I did not retreat. I kept my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. I said, Is that why you refinanced the house? I saw the filing. It was the third time in 5 years, wasn't it? And this time it was a cash-out refinance with a variable interest rate. That is a bold move, Dad. Most financial advisors would call that distressed. My mother dropped her fork. It hit the china plate with a loud clatter that made everyone jump. She looked at my father, her eyes wide with panic. She did not know. I realized it then. He had hidden it from her too. He had mortgaged their castle to pay for the moat, and he hadn't told the queen. Luther slammed his hand onto the table. The wine in his glass sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "How dare you!" he roared, his voice cracked, losing its polished baritone. "You have been snooping. You broke into my office. I will have you arrested for invasion of privacy." The guests were exchanging nervous glances. Uncle Marcus looked down at his plate, suddenly very interested in his green beans. This was not the polite family drama they were used to. This was ugly. This was real. I leaned back in my chair, unbothered by his outburst. "I did not break into anything, Dad. I do not need to pick locks to know you are drowning. Mortgage filings are public record in the state of Georgia. Anyone with an internet connection and the county clerk's website can see them." I paused, letting that sink in. I looked around the table at the stunned guests. "It is all there." I continued, addressing the room. "The initial mortgage, the second line of equity, and now this third loan. It looks like the bank owns about 90% of this house. So when you say the Neptune is a testament to your hard work, do you mean the bank's hard work? Because technically they are the ones buying it." My father looked like he was having a stroke. His veins bulged in his neck. He opened his mouth to shout, but no words came out. He was exposed. For the first time in his life, the curtain had been pulled back and the wizard was just a desperate old man with a gambling problem. "Shut up," Candace screamed. She stood up so abruptly, her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the floor. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisted in ugly, defensive rage. "You are just jealous," she shrieked. "You are a bitter, jealous little loser. You are making things up because you know you are not getting anything. You know Dad is leaving everything to me and Gavin because we are the ones who actually made something of ourselves." She was panting, her chest heaving. She looked at the guests, desperate to salvage the narrative. "Do not listen to her. She is lying. She is just angry because she was written out of the will. She wants to ruin our Thanksgiving because she is miserable." I looked at my sister. I looked at the fear in her eyes. She wasn't defending our father. She was defending her inheritance. She was defending the future she thought was guaranteed. She was the golden child waiting for the golden egg, unaware that the goose had been dead for years. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, tinged with a dark, delicious humor. "Jealous," I repeated softly. I looked at the opulent dining room, at the crystal chandelier that was likely leased, at the silk curtains that were probably paid for with a credit card that was now maxed out. I looked at the mountain of debt they called a legacy. "Candace," I said, my voice calm and clear, "why would I be jealous? I have seen the balance sheets. I have seen the liens. Inheriting this estate isn't a gift. It is a lawsuit waiting to happen." I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth. "Honestly, sis, I am not angry. I am relieved. When Dad leaves this all to you, he is not giving you a fortune. He is handing you an anchor. And I am just happy I won't be the one chained to it when the ship goes down." I turned back to my father. "So about that yacht, will you be financing that with a fourth mortgage? Or are we moving on to predatory payday loans now?" My father stared at me. The rage in his eyes was replaced by something else. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. He realized then that I wasn't guessing. He realized I knew everything. And what terrified him most wasn't that I knew. It was that I was no longer afraid to say it. The table was silent, but the air was screaming. The facade didn't just crack. It shattered. And I was the only one holding a broom. The silence that followed my revelation about the third mortgage was heavy enough to crush bones. My father sat frozen at the head of the table, his mouth slightly open, looking like a man who had just been slapped by a ghost. The guests were pretending to be fascinated by the floral arrangements, terrified to make eye contact with either the accuser or the accused. For a solid minute, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds of my father's diminishing dignity. Then the swinging doors to the kitchen pushed open. Henri, the head of the catering service my mother had hired, stepped into the dining room. Henri was a professional. I had seen him manage crises at weddings and galas with the calm demeanor of a bomb disposal expert. But tonight Henri looked rattled. He was clutching a small black leather billfolder against his chest, as if it were a shield. He scanned the room, his eyes darting nervously from the guests to my parents, before locking onto my father. He walked quickly toward the head of the table, his polished shoes making no sound on the rug. He leaned down close to my father's ear, whispering something urgent. My father, who was still reeling from my previous attack and desperate to reassert his dominance, recoiled as if Henri had spit on him. He slammed his hand on the table for the second time that night, making the silverware jump. "Stop whispering," my father barked, his voice cracking with misplaced aggression. He glared at the poor catering manager. "We are in the middle of a family dinner. If you have something to say, say it. Do not skulk around like a thief." Henri straightened up. He looked offended. He adjusted his bow tie, his professional mask slipping just a fraction to reveal the annoyance underneath. "Sir, I was trying to be discreet," Henri said, his voice stiff. "It is a matter of the bill." My father let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He looked around the table, inviting the guests to share in his outrage. "The bill. You are interrupting my Thanksgiving toast for the bill. We have an account with your agency, Henri. Just run the card on file. Why is this even a conversation?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Go on. Run it. Do not bore my guests with administrative trivia." Henri did not move. He held his ground, clutching the leather folder tighter. "I did run the card," Sir Henri said. His voice was louder now, projecting clearly across the silent room. "I ran the American Express Platinum on file 3 times, and my father demanded, reaching for his wineglass with a shaking hand. "It was declined," Henri said. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Declined. My father froze. The glass never made it to his lips. He lowered it slowly to the table. A nervous titter ran through the guests, quickly stifled. Being declined was the ultimate sin in their world. It was worse than adultery. It was worse than illness. It was a loss of power. "Do not be ridiculous," my father scoffed, though his face had gone pale. "It is a platinum card. It has no preset spending limit. You clearly have a connection issue with your machine. Try it again." "I did not have a connection issue," Sir Henri replied, his patience evaporating. "And it was not a generic decline. The terminal gave a specific code. Code 407. My father frowned. "What is code 407? Henri looked directly at my father, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of satisfaction in the manager's eyes. He had been yelled at, belittled, and treated like furniture by my family all evening. This was his moment. "It means frozen assets," Sir Henri said clearly. "The issuer has suspended the account due to a seizure order." A fork clattered onto a china plate. I think it was Aunt Sheila. She looked as if she had just swallowed a bug. "Frozen." My father repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "That is impossible. That is a mistake. A banking error. I will have the bank manager fired on Monday morning for this incompetence." He stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate the machine into working. "Run it again." "I cannot run it again," Sir Henri said, stepping back. "The system has flagged the card as invalid, and per our contract for an event of this size, payment is required upon completion of service. The outstanding balance is $5,400, including the vintage wines Mr. Gavin ordered." My father looked at the bill folder as if it contained anthrax. He looked at the guests. The facade of the wealthy, powerful Dr. Robinson was crumbling in real time, brick by brick. He patted his pockets, pretending to look for another card. But I knew his wallet was empty of options. He had leveraged everything to keep up appearances. The room was suffocating. This wasn't just a declined card. This was a public exposure of insolvency. The guests who had been eating the expensive turkey and drinking the expensive wine suddenly looked down at their plates, realizing they were consuming stolen goods. They were witnesses to a financial crime scene. My father turned his desperate eyes toward Gavin. "Gavin?" My father said, his voice straining to sound casual but failing miserably. "My bank is clearly having a technical glitch, probably a security hold because of the holiday. You know how these algorithms are." He forced a laugh that sounded like a dry cough. "Son, take care of this for me, will you? I will have my accountant wire you the money first thing in the morning. Just get Henri out of here so we can finish our dessert." Gavin looked up, startled. He had been trying to make himself invisible since our exchange about the zoning laws. Now the spotlight was swinging back to him. "Me," Gavin squeaked. "Yes, you," my father said, impatient now. "Use your corporate card, the one you are always bragging about. The one with the unlimited limit." Gavin swallowed hard. He looked at Candace, who was staring at the tablecloth, refusing to meet his eyes. He looked at Henri, who was waiting expectantly with the card reader in his hand. Sure," Gavin said, his voice trembling. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek metal credit card. It caught the light of the chandelier, a symbol of status, or at least it used to be. He handed it to Henri with a hand that shook so badly he almost dropped it. Henri took the card. He inserted it into the portable machine. We all watched. The silence was absolute. Beep, beep, beep. Processing. I watched the little screen on the reader. I didn't need to see it to know what it would say. I took another sip of my water, the cool liquid soothing my throat. I watched my father wiping sweat from his upper lip. I watched my mother gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. The machine let out a long, harsh buzz, a sound of rejection. Henri looked at the screen, then at Gavin. He didn't whisper this time. He didn't need to. "Declined," Henri said flatly. "Same code. Frozen assets. Seizure order pending investigation." Gavin closed his eyes. My father slumped back into his chair. The guests began to shift in their seats. Chairs scraped against the floor. People started checking their watches, suddenly remembering they had early morning's dogs to walk, babysitters to relieve. The illusion was gone. The smell of expensive perfume was replaced by the stench of desperation. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wild, pleading. She looked at the pocket where I had put the $15,000 check, the check that was drawn on the very account that had just been frozen. She realized it. If the account was frozen, the check was worthless paper. She had tried to pay me off with money she didn't even have access to anymore. But she also remembered I had money. She remembered the rumors of my typing jobs. "Tasha," she hissed across the table, "do you have cash?" I looked at her. I looked at Henri. I looked at the bill folder. I smiled. "I am afraid not." "Mother," I said calmly, "I am just a freelance data entry clerk. Where would I get $5,000? Maybe you should ask Candace. She is the one with the campaign funds, isn't she?" Candace gasped, her head snapping up. The trap was set. The first domino had fallen, and now it was time to watch the rest of the line collapse. Gavin sat there, his hand hovering in the air, as if he could somehow will the credit card machine to change its mind. The little black box in Henri's hand had just beeped a final damning tone. It wasn't the cheerful chirp of approval, it was the low, flat buzz of rejection. Henri looked at the screen, his eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. He didn't just look annoyed anymore, he looked intrigued. He looked like a man who was witnessing a car crash in slow motion and couldn't look away. Sir Henri said, his voice projecting clearly to every corner of the silent dining room. "This card has also been declined." Gavin let out a nervous laugh that sounded more like a choke. "That is impossible. That is a corporate black card. It has a limit higher than the GDP of a small country." Run it again. Your machine is broken. It has to be broken. Henri shook his head slowly. The machine is working perfectly, Mr. Gavin. And the error code is quite specific. It is not insufficient funds. Gavin froze. His face, usually flushed with wine and arrogance, drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just heard the lock click on a prison cell. What? What does it say? Gavin whispered. Henri turned the screen so Gavin could see it, but he read it out loud for the benefit of the audience. Error code 902. Account suspended by federal investigative order. Please contact the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. The spoon I was holding clinked softly against my dessert bowl. It was the only sound in the room. Federal investigation. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Gavin dropped his hand. He looked at my father, then at Candace, his eyes wide with terror. He wasn't worried about the dinner bill anymore. He was worried about the orange jumpsuit he might be wearing in the very near future. He knew exactly what he had done. He knew about the funds he had siphoned from the construction accounts to cover his bad crypto bets. He just didn't know that anyone else knew. My father looked at Gavin with a mixture of confusion and horror. Federal investigation. Gavin, what is he talking about? What did you do? Gavin stammered, sweat dripping down his temple. Nothing. It is a mistake, a clerical error. I need to make a phone call. He reached for his phone, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped it onto the table. It clattered loudly, cracking the screen. Candace, sensing the walls closing in, decided to play the hero. She stood up, smoothing her dress, trying to project the authority of a future city councilwoman. She glared at Henri as if he were a heckler at a campaign rally. "This is ridiculous," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. "Obviously, there is some sort of banking glitch affecting the men in this family. I will take care of it." She opened her designer clutch and pulled out a sleek red credit card. It wasn't a personal card. I recognized the logo immediately. It was the debit card for her campaign fund, the Vote for Candace war chest. Using it for a personal family dinner was not just unethical. It was illegal. It was a direct violation of campaign finance laws. But Candace was desperate. She needed to save the family image, and she was willing to commit a felony to do it. "Just put it on this," she said, thrusting the card at Henri, "and add a 20% tip. I don't want to hear another word about declined transactions." Henri hesitated. He looked at the card, then at Candace. "Ms. Robinson, are you sure this appears to be a business account?" "Just run it." Candace shrieked, her composure cracking. "Do you want to get paid or not?" Henri shrugged. He swiped the card. I took a bite of my pumpkin pie. It was delicious. The nutmeg was perfectly balanced. I chewed slowly, savoring the sweetness, while my sister waited for the machine to validate her crime. Beep, 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 buzz. Candace's jaw dropped. She stared at the machine as if it had slapped her. "Declined," she gasped. "That is impossible. There is over $50,000 in that account. Donors just wired money yesterday." Henri looked at the screen again. He actually winced this time. "I am sorry, Ms. Robinson. It says account frozen. Suspected misappropriation of funds. Contact the Ethics Committee." Candace collapsed back into her chair. She didn't just sit. She fell as if her legs had been cut out from under her. She looked at the guests, who were now openly staring, their mouths agape. They weren't just witnessing a bad dinner. They were witnessing the implosion of the Robinson dynasty. First my father, then Gavin, now Candace. 3 credit cards, 3 pillars of our family's success, all frozen, all broken. The silence was absolute. It was heavy and thick. The guests looked at their half-eaten food, wondering if they would be asked to wash dishes to pay for it. My father had his head in his hands. Gavin was staring blankly at the wall, muttering to himself about lawyers. And there I sat. The failure, the outcast, the one they had tried to banish to Arizona. I was the only person at the table who was still eating. I sliced another piece of pie with surgical precision. The sound of my fork scraping the china was amplified in the quiet room. Scrape, Clink. Chew. I looked up to find my mother staring at me. Catherine Robinson, the woman who cared more about magazine photos than her own flesh and blood, was looking at me with a terrifying intensity. Her eyes were wild. She looked at the expensive wine bottles on the table. She looked at the bill folder in Henri's hand. She looked at the terrified faces of her social circle. Then she remembered. She remembered the envelope. She remembered the gift my father had so graciously bestowed upon me just an hour ago. Her eyes snapped to the pocket of my blazer, the pocket where the $15,000 check was resting. "You!" she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. I swallowed my bite of pie and dabbed my mouth with the napkin. "Yes, Mother." "You have the check," she screamed, standing up and rushing toward my end of the table. "The check your father gave you. $15,000. Give it to me." She didn't ask. She didn't plead. She demanded it as if I were a thief holding her property. I looked at her calmly. "You gave that to me, remember? It was my severance package. To start my new life in Arizona. I don't care what it was." She yelled, her voice shrill and ugly. "We need to pay this bill. We are being humiliated. Give me the check back, Tasha." Now she reached out, actually trying to grab my lapel, trying to physically fish the check out of my pocket. I caught her wrist. I didn't squeeze hard, just enough to stop her. My hand was cool and steady against her frantic, trembling skin. "Mother," I said softly, "think about this. That check is drawn on Dad's account. The same account that was just frozen." She froze. She looked at me, her eyes widening as the logic penetrated her panic. If the card didn't work, I continued, releasing her wrist. "Then the check won't work either. It is just a piece of paper now. It has no value, just like everything else in this house." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. She realized I was right. She had no money. Her husband had no money. Her golden children had no money. They were trapped in a 5-star restaurant experience with 0-star finances. "But," she stammered, tears of frustration welling in her eyes, "but we have to do something. We can't. The guests." "Tasha, do something. You always fix things. You are the practical one." I almost laughed. Now I was the practical one. 10 minutes ago I was the embarrassment. Now I was the last resort. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. "I am sorry, Mother," I said, "but I believe you told me I don't belong at this table. And since I am just a freelance data entry clerk, I certainly don't have $5,000 to spare for vintage wine." I looked at Gavin, who was still muttering. "Maybe Gavin can wash dishes. I hear he is looking for honest work with a low barrier to entry." My mother looked like she was going to slap me. But before she could move, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite social ring. It was a long, insistent press. Everyone jumped. My father looked up from his hands. "Who could that be? The police? The press?" I smiled. I checked my watch. "Right on time. I don't think that is the police, Dad," I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. "I think that is the solution to your problem. Or perhaps the beginning of a much bigger one." I walked past my stunned mother, past my terrified sister, and headed toward the front door. The dominoes had all fallen. Now it was time to sweep them up. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. It was a sharp, insistent sound that sliced through my mother's hysteria like a guillotine. The demand for the check died on her lips. She froze, her hand still outstretched toward me, her eyes darting toward the foyer. In the Robinson household, unannounced guests were a sin. We did not have drop-ins. We had appointments. We had galas. We had scheduled appearances. A doorbell ringing at 8 in the evening on Thanksgiving could only mean one of two things: a tragedy or the authorities. Given the credit card situation, my family was clearly terrified it was the latter. My father stood up, wiping his forehead with a napkin that was already soaked with sweat. He looked at the door as if it were a portal to hell. "Who is that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Did anyone call the police? Gavin? Did you call someone? Gavin shook his head rapidly, looking like he was about to be sick. I did not call anyone, I swear. Maybe it is the press. Oh God, if the press is here about the investigation, my career is over. My mother grabbed her pearl necklace, clutching it like a rosary. Luther, do not answer it. Just tell the staff to send them away. Tell them we are quarantined. Tell them anything. I sat calmly in my chair watching them scramble like rats on a sinking ship. I took a slow sip of water. I really think you should answer it, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through their panic. It sounds important. My father glared at me, but the bell rang a third time. Whoever was out there was not going away. He straightened his jacket, trying to summon the ghost of his former dignity, and marched toward the foyer. The entire dining room fell silent. We could hear his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. We heard the heavy oak door creak open. Then we heard a gasp. But it wasn't a gasp of fear. It was a gasp of relief. Arthur, my father's voice boomed loud and full of sudden, desperate hope. Oh, thank God, I knew you would come through. Come in, come in. He walked back into the dining room, practically dragging a man in with him. My father's face was flushed with excitement. He looked at the guests, beaming. Everyone relax. It is Arthur Sterling. He is here to clear up this mess. A ripple of shock went through the room. Even the guests who were half asleep woke up at the mention of that name. Arthur Sterling was not just a lawyer. In New York and Atlanta financial circles, he was a myth. He was the managing partner of Sterling and Vance, a firm known for destroying corporations and restructuring empires before breakfast. He was ruthless, brilliant, and terrifyingly expensive. If you saw Arthur Sterling, it meant money was moving, a lot of money. My father looked at my mother, his eyes shining. I called his office earlier this week about a bridge loan, Catherine. I didn't think he would come personally, but here he is. He must have heard about the bank glitch and came to fix it. See? I told you I had connections. Arthur Sterling stepped into the light of the chandelier. He was a tall man, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the average American home. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark entering a wading pool. Behind him walked two assistants, a man and a woman, both young, sharp, and carrying heavy leather briefcases. They looked like executioners in business casual. My father extended his hand toward Sterling, a wide, sycophantic smile on his face. Arthur, I cannot tell you how good it is to see you. We are having a little technical difficulty with the accounts tonight. Some ridiculous freeze order. I assume you have the paperwork to lift it, or maybe you brought a cashier's check to cover the bridge loan. Either way, you are a lifesaver. Grab a glass of wine. Join us. I watched closely. This was the moment where delusion meets reality. Arthur Sterling did not take my father's hand. He did not even slow down. He looked at my father's outstretched hand with the same indifference one might show to a coat rack. He walked right past him. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just kept moving, his eyes scanning the room. My father was left standing there, his hand shaking in empty air, his smile freezing into a rictus of confusion. Arthur, my father asked, his voice small. Sterling ignored him. He walked past Gavin, who shrank back in his chair, terrified that Sterling was there to serve him a warrant. He walked past Candace, who was frantically trying to check her reflection in a spoon. He walked past the wealthy guests, who all lowered their eyes respectfully. He was looking for someone. The room held its breath. Who was the Titan of Wall Street looking for in the Robinson dining room? He walked to the end of the table, to the dark corner where I sat, to the seat that was furthest from the head of the table, the seat reserved for the failure, the outcast. He stopped right in front of me. My mother let out a confused squeak. Tasha. Why is he standing by Tasha? Sterling turned to his assistants and snapped his fingers. The young woman immediately stepped forward and opened her briefcase. She pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. She handed it to Sterling with both hands. Sterling took the document. Then he did something that made my father's knees buckle. He bowed. It wasn't a deep theatrical bow. It was a sharp, respectful inclination of his head, a gesture of deference from a powerful man to a superior. "Good evening, Ms. Robinson," Sterling said. His voice was deep, smooth, and carried the weight of absolute authority. I placed my hands on the table and looked up at him. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. I apologize for making you work on a holiday." Sterling smiled, a genuine warm smile that my father had probably never seen in his life. "For a client of your stature, Ms. Robinson, holidays are merely suggestions. We are at your service 24 hours a day." The silence in the room was so profound it felt physical. My father looked like he was hallucinating. My mother was gripping the tablecloth so hard I thought she might rip it. "Ms. Robinson," my father whispered. "Why is he calling her Ms. Robinson? I am Dr. Robinson. She is just Tasha." Sterling ignored the background noise. He placed the velvet-bound document on the table in front of me, right next to my half-eaten pumpkin pie. He took a gold fountain pen from his pocket and uncapped it. "I am sorry to interrupt your dinner," Sterling said, his tone apologetic, "but the acquisition was finalized at 4:59 p.m. today. The banks were anxious to offload the toxic assets before the holiday weekend closed. We needed your final signature to certify the transfer of the debt ownership." "Debt ownership." Gavin choked out the words. "What debt?" Sterling turned his head slightly, giving Gavin a withering look over his shoulder. "The debt of the Luther Robinson estate," Sterling said coldly. "The 3 mortgages, the construction loans, the personal lines of credit, and of course the pending litigation regarding your own misappropriation of funds, young man." He turned back to me, his face softening. "My firm has successfully purchased all of it as per your instructions, Ms. Robinson. We bought the paper at 40 cents on the dollar, a masterstroke of timing, if I may say so." I took the pen. It felt heavy and cool in my hand. "So it is done?" I asked. "It is done," Sterling confirmed. "Once you sign this, you are the sole lien holder. You effectively own every brick, every piece of furniture, and every debt obligation in this room. You are the bank." I looked at the document. The header read, "Transfer of Asset Ownership. Assignee, Phantom Inc. Ventures, LLC. Beneficiary, Natasha Robinson." I looked up at my family. My father was leaning against the wall, looking gray. My mother was shaking her head in denial. Candace was staring at me with her mouth open, the realization slowly dawning on her that the sister she had mocked for being poor was actually the one holding the leash. They thought I was typing data for minimum wage. They didn't know that for the last 5 years I had been the silent architect behind the best-selling memoirs of senators and CEOs. They didn't know I had invested every penny of my 7-figure royalties into distressed debt markets. They didn't know that while they were buying boats they couldn't afford, I was buying the banks that lent them the money. I looked at my father. "You wanted me to leave Dad," I said softly. "You gave me a check for $15,000 to start a new life." I signed the document with a flourish. The ink was dark and permanent. I handed the pen back to Sterling. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "Thank you, Ms. Robinson," Sterling replied, taking the document. "Congratulations on the acquisition. It is a lovely property, although the current tenants seem to be in significant arrears." He looked at my father. "Significant arrears." My mother finally found her voice. It was a scream, "Tasha, what is going on? What did you sign? What does he mean you own the debt?" I stood up. I smoothed my vintage blazer. I looked at the people who had treated me like a ghost in my own home. "It means, Mother, that I am not the guest at this table anymore. I am the landlord, and rent is due." The silence that followed Arthur Sterling's bow was absolute. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the room, suffocating the soft jazz music and the clinking of silverware. For a moment, nobody breathed. My father looked as though he had been struck by lightning, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He stared at the silver-haired lawyer, then at me, then back at the lawyer, his brain frantically trying to reconcile the impossibility of what he was seeing. In his world, Arthur Sterling was a god of finance, a man who ate corporations for breakfast. In his world, I was Tasha the disappointment, who could barely afford rent. Seeing a god bow to a peasant had caused a short circuit in his reality. Then the scream shattered the quiet. It came from Candace, of course. My sister pushed herself up from the table so violently that her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the parquet floor with a deafening clatter. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, desperate denial. She looked like a child who had been told Santa Claus was dead. "You are making a mistake!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her manicured nail looking like a claw. "That is Tasha. She is a nobody. She is a data entry clerk. She types documents for minimum wage. Look at her clothes. She buys her blazers at thrift stores. You have the wrong person, Mr. Sterling. You are embarrassing yourself." She looked around the room, pleading with the guests to back her up, desperate to restore the hierarchy that made her the queen and me the servant. "Tell him, Dad," she begged. "Tell him she is just a typist." Sterling turned to look at my sister. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He looked at her with the cool, detached boredom of a scientist observing a particularly stupid lab rat. He adjusted his silk tie slowly, letting her rant hang in the air until it withered and died. "I do not make mistakes," Mrs. Gavin Sterling said, his voice smooth and cold. He intentionally used her husband's name, stripping her of her own identity, just as she had tried to strip me of mine. And I am quite aware of who Ms. Robinson is. In fact, I dare say I know her financial portfolio better than you know your own husband's criminal record. He walked around the table until he was standing directly behind my chair, placing a hand on the back of it like a royal guard. "Ms. Robinson is indeed a typist, if that is what you wish to call it." Sterling continued, his eyes scanning the room. "She is the ghostwriter behind the best-selling memoir of the former President of the United States. She is the architectural mind behind the 3 most influential economic treatises published on Wall Street this year. Her pen name commands an advance of $2 million before she even types a single word." A collective gasp went through the room. My mother brought a hand to her throat, clutching her pearls as if they were strangling her. The guests looked at me with new eyes. Suddenly, my silence wasn't weakness, it was discretion. My vintage blazer wasn't cheap, it was eccentric. Sterling wasn't finished, he enjoyed this, I could tell. And more importantly to the matter at hand, Sterling said, pitching his voice so it carried to the back of the room. "She is the sole founder and proprietor of Phantom Inc. Ventures. It is a private equity firm that specializes in the acquisition of high-yield distressed assets. Ms. Robinson is not just my client. She is one of the most liquid investors in the state of Georgia. Phantom Inc." My father whispered the name. He knew it. He had read about it in the financial journals. It was the mysterious firm that had been aggressively buying up commercial real estate and bad debt all over the city. He had even tried to get a meeting with them last year to beg for a loan. He had been rejected by a secretary. He realized now that the secretary was probably me. The color drained from his face so completely, he looked like a corpse propped up in a suit. "You," he wheezed. "You are Phantom Inc." I slowly pushed my chair back. The sound of wood scraping against wood was loud and deliberate. I stood up. I took my time. I smoothed the lapels of my Yves Saint Laurent blazer. I picked up my silk napkin and gently dabbed the corner of my mouth, removing a crumb of the pumpkin pie I had been enjoying while they panicked. I looked down at them. My father slumped and gray. My mother trembling and pale. Candace freezing in a rictus of shock. Gavin looking at the floor as if hoping a hole would open up and swallow him. "Yes, Dad," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I am Phantom Inc., and as Mr. Sterling said, my firm specializes in non-performing loans." I walked over to the side of the table where Sterling had placed the thick blue dossier. I ran my hand over the velvet cover. We look for a very specific type of borrower, I explained, sounding like I was giving a seminar. We look for people who are overleveraged, people who care more about image than solvency, people who refinance their primary residence 3 times to buy boats they cannot afford, people who live on credit and arrogance. I picked up the heavy file. It felt solid in my hands. It felt like justice. This morning I continued locking eyes with my mother. Your bank categorized the Robinson Family Trust as a toxic asset. They were terrified of your default risk. They wanted you off their books before the quarter ended. So when my firm approached them with a cash offer to buy your entire debt portfolio, they didn't just say yes, they thanked me. I lifted the dossier high in the air, letting everyone see the legal seals, the red stamps, the undeniable weight of the truth. I bought your debt for 40 cents on the dollar, I said. It was a bargain, really, considering the prime location of this real estate. I dropped the dossier. I didn't hand it to them. I let it fall from my hand. It landed with a heavy, wet thud right in the center of the table, directly on top of the half-eaten Thanksgiving turkey. The impact sent a spray of brown gravy splattering onto the pristine white tablecloth and onto my father's expensive tie. The noise made everyone jump. Happy Thanksgiving? I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. I am now the legal owner of this house. I own the mortgage on your medical practice, Dad. I own the lien on Gavin's failing construction project. And I own the $20,000 in credit card debt you tried to use to pay for this dinner. My mother let out a sob, a raw, ugly sound of total defeat. Tasha, you cannot mean that. You are our daughter. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table, leaning into her space, just as she had done to me in the hallway. I am not your daughter tonight, Catherine, I said coldly. Tonight I am your creditor. And unlike you, I do not care about family photos or magazine spreads. I care about my return on investment. I looked at the guests, who were staring at me with a mixture of terror and awe. I suggest you all finish your wine quickly, I told them, because as the new owner, I plan on changing the locks in exactly 1 hour, and I would hate for anyone to get locked inside with these squatters. I stood up straight and turned to Sterling. Arthur, please walk the former owners through the foreclosure timeline. I believe they have 30 days to vacate, but since they were planning on kicking me out tomorrow morning, I think we can expedite the eviction process for cause. I turned my back on my family. I didn't need to see their faces. I could hear their world shattering, and it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The heavy blue dossier sat on the center of the table like a loaded weapon. It was sitting right on top of the turkey carcass, soaking up the grease and gravy, but nobody cared about the mess. All eyes were glued to that velvet cover. Gavin was staring at it with a hunger that was terrified and desperate. He knew what was inside. He knew that file did not just contain mortgage papers, it contained his life. It contained the paper trail of every lie he had told for the past 3 years. The alcohol in his system clashed with the adrenaline of pure panic. He made a guttural noise, something between a sob and a growl. Then he moved. It was a clumsy, frantic lunge. Gavin scrambled over his chair, knocking over a crystal water pitcher that shattered on the floor. He threw himself across the table, his arms outstretched, his fingers clawing for the dossier. He did not care that he was dipping his expensive silk tie into the cranberry sauce. He just needed to destroy that file. He needed to rip it apart and eat the pieces if necessary. "Give that to me!" he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "That is confidential. You cannot have that." He never reached it. One of Arthur Sterling's assistants, the young man who had been standing silently by the wall like a statue, moved with terrifying speed. He did not look like a brawler, but he moved like a cobra. He stepped forward and intercepted Gavin midway across the table. He did not punch him. He simply placed a large, firm hand on Gavin's chest and shoved. It was a precise, calculated push. Gavin flew backward as if he had run into a brick wall. He crashed back into his chair, tipping it over again, and sprawled onto the hardwood floor in a heap of tangled limbs and humiliation. "Stay down, Mr. Gavin," the assistant said. His voice was bored. "Please do not make me restrain you further." Gavin scrambled backward on his hands and knees, looking up at the assistant, then at me. He was panting, his face red and sweaty. He looked pathetic. This was the man who had mocked my thrift store blazer. This was the man who had called me a charity case. Now he was on the floor, cowering before my employee. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing over him. I looked down at my brother-in-law. "You are wondering about the credit card, aren't you, Gavin?" I asked softly. "You are wondering why the machine gave you error code 902. Gavin swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. It is a mistake. The bank? It is not the bank," I interrupted. "It is the Securities and Exchange Commission." I signaled to the assistant. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He handed it to me. I held it up for Gavin to see. It was a copy of an email. "Last week, when I was doing my due diligence on the family debt, I noticed some interesting irregularities in the Sterling Heights construction ledger." I explained, keeping my voice conversational. "You were moving money, Gavin. A lot of money. You were taking funds from the construction loan meant for materials and labor, and you were funneling them into an offshore crypto wallet." Gavin turned pale. He tried to speak, but only a squeak came out. $2 million, I said. "You stole $2 million from investors to cover your gambling losses. You thought no one would notice because you buried it in consulting fees and material markups. But I noticed. I always notice the numbers, Gavin. That is what data entry clerks do. We read the data." I let the paper flutter down to the floor, landing next to his hand. "So I did my civic duty," I continued. "I submitted an anonymous whistleblower tip to the SEC 3 days ago. I attached the ledgers. I attached the wallet addresses. That is why your assets were frozen tonight, Gavin. The feds are already building the indictment. You are not just broke. You are going to federal prison." Gavin let out a wail. He curled into a ball on the floor, covering his head with his hands. He began to sob, loud, ugly, heaving sobs that echoed off the expensive wallpaper. My father looked at Gavin with horror. He looked at me with fear. He realized that the shark in the room wasn't Arthur Sterling. It was me. But I wasn't done. I turned my attention to the person sitting next to Gavin's empty chair. My sister, Candace. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to look at her husband on the floor, refusing to look at me. She was trying to disassociate. She was trying to pretend she was in a different movie, one where she was still the princess and I was still the extra. "Candace," I said. She flinched. She didn't turn her head. I walked over to her. I stood right next to her ear. "You look shocked, sis. Are you shocked because Gavin is a criminal, or are you shocked because you know you are next?" She whipped her head around to look at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of rage and terror. "I didn't do anything," she hissed. "That was Gavin. I didn't know he was stealing. I have my own money. I have my campaign funds." "Ah, yes," I said, nodding. "The campaign funds. The Vote for Candace war chest. The money donated by the good people of Atlanta who believe in your vision for the community." I snapped my fingers. The female assistant stepped forward. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of credit card statements. They were stapled together, thick and heavy. I took the stack and dropped it on the table in front of Candace. "I had my forensic accountant look into your campaign spending," I said. "It is fascinating reading." "Really?" Candace tried to swipe the papers away, but I slammed my hand down on them, pinning them to the table. "Page 3, I said. "October 12th, a $4,000 charge at the Hermes Boutique in Buckhead. Is that for campaign materials? Candace, are Birkin bags essential for voter outreach?" Candace's lip trembled. That was a gift for a donor." I flipped the page. Page 10. November 1st. 2 first-class tickets to Paris. $10,000. plus a 5-night stay at the Ritz. Was that a diplomatic mission? Or was that the girls' trip you posted on Instagram? She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. I leaned in closer. That is embezzlement, Candace, I whispered. Misuse of campaign funds. It is a felony. And unlike Gavin, you are a public figure. When this gets out, and it will get out, you won't just lose the election. You will be the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. Counsel hopeful, indicted for fraud. I stood up straight and looked at the guests. My sister wanted to be a leader, I announced to the room. She wanted to represent this family. But it turns out she has been treating her campaign account like a personal piggy bank. She has stolen over $50,000 from her own supporters to buy clothes, jewelry, and vacations. No, Candace screamed. It is not true. I was going to pay it back. It was a loan. A loan implies permission. Candace, I said coldly, taking money without asking is theft. And I have the receipts. All of them. Candace looked at the stack of papers. She looked at her husband crying on the floor. She looked at our parents who were staring at her as if she were a stranger. The dam broke. The golden child crumbled. Candace let out a shriek of pure frustration and despair. She buried her face in her hands and began to weep. It wasn't the pretty, delicate crying she did for the cameras. This was ugly. This was raw. Her shoulders shook violently. Her expensive mascara mixed with her tears and ran down her face in black, oily streaks. Snot bubbled from her nose. She looked frantic, messy, and completely broken. The image of perfection she had spent 32 years cultivating evaporated in seconds. She wasn't the poised, successful politician. She was a spoiled child who had been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. My father looked from Gavin to Candace. His legacy, his pride and joy. One was a felon, the other a fraud. He looked at me. I was standing tall. My blazer was crisp. My face was dry. You ruined them, my father whispered. His voice was hoarse. You destroyed your own family. I looked at him. I looked at the wreckage of the dinner party. I didn't ruin them, Dad, I said. I just turned on the lights. They were the ones stealing in the dark. I just made sure everyone could see what they were holding. I looked down at Candace, who was gasping for air between sobs. You should save those tears for the jury, Candace, I said. I hear judges go easier on defendants who show remorse. But knowing you, you will probably try to blame the accountant. I turned away from her, wailing. The sound didn't make me sad. It sounded like closure. I walked back to my seat, picked up my water glass, and took a long, refreshing sip. The show was almost over, but I had one act left. It was time to deal with the landlords. The room was filled with the sound of my sister weeping, a raw and ugly noise that signaled the death of her political ambitions. My brother-in-law was still curled on the floor, a ball of misery in a designer suit. But my focus was not on them. My focus was on the man standing at the head of the table. My father, Dr. Luther Robinson. For 29 years he had been the sun around which this family orbited. His word was law. His approval was the only currency that mattered. If he smiled, you were safe. If he frowned, you were exiled. He had ruled us with a combination of financial control and emotional withholding. But now, as he looked at the wreckage of his dinner party, I saw something I had never seen before. I saw a man who realized his throne was made of cardboard. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to inflate his chest, trying to summon the ghost of the patriarch he used to be. He looked at me not with love, but with desperation, masquerading as authority. Tasha, he said. His voice wavered, then strengthened. He was trying to command me one last time. Stop this. Stop this immediately. You have had your fun. You have made your point. But this has gone too far. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I am your father, he announced, as if that title alone was a magic spell that could reverse bankruptcy and federal indictments. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. I paid for your clothes, your food, your education. You cannot come into my house and threaten me. You cannot treat your own flesh and blood like criminals." He looked around the room seeking validation from the few shell-shocked guests who remained. "She is my daughter," he told them, his voice rising. "This is a family matter. We will handle this internally. Tasha, tell Mr. Sterling to leave. Tell him to tear up those papers. You are going to sit down, apologize to your sister, and we are going to fix this. Because I am your father and I say so." It was a valiant effort. In the past, that tone would have made me crumble. It would have made me apologize for existing. But tonight his voice sounded hollow. It sounded like a radio playing in an empty room. I did not sit down. I did not apologize. I walked slowly toward him, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. I stopped just out of his reach. I looked him up and down, taking in the sweat beading on his forehead, the stain on his tie, the fear behind his eyes. I tilted my head slightly, studying him, as if he were a stranger. "You are right, Luther," I said softly. "Biologically, you are my father. That is a matter of genetics." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "But we are not in a biology class," I continued, my voice sharpening. "We are in a business transaction. And in the world of business, titles like father and daughter are irrelevant. They are sentimental clutter." I gestured to the blue dossier sitting on the table, the legal proof of his demise. "Read the paperwork, Luther. Look at the signatures. Look at the lien holder." I took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look up at me. "Right now, on paper, in the eyes of the state of Georgia and the United States banking system, I am not your daughter. I am your creditor. And you are a debtor. You are a liability. You are a bad investment that I am currently trying to salvage." My father flinched as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "In business," I said cold and fast, "there is no blood. There is only leverage. And right now I have all of it. You have none. You are living in a house owned by my company. You are driving a car leased by a bank I now control. Even the wine you are drinking was paid for by a credit line that I hold the deed to." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "So do not talk to me about family, Luther. Family protects each other. Creditors foreclose. And I am trying very hard to decide which one I want to be tonight." He slumped. The air went out of him completely. He grabbed the back of his chair to steady himself. He looked old. Suddenly, undeniably old. "Tasha," he whispered, pleading now. "Please." I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. I felt the crisp paper of the check he had given me an hour ago. The $15,000. The bribe to make me disappear. The severance package for being a disappointment. I pulled it out. I held it up between two fingers like a piece of dirty trash. "Do you remember this?" I asked. My father looked at the check. He looked sick. $15,000, I said, looking at the number. "That is what you thought I was worth. That was the price tag you put on our relationship. You thought you could buy my absence for the price of a used Honda." I laughed, a short, dry sound. "It is funny, really. You were so worried about me being poor. You were so worried I would be a burden." I gripped the check with both hands. "I do not need your money, Dad," I said. "Reap!" The sound of the paper tearing was sharp and final. I tore it in half. Then I put the halves together and tore them again. And again. I shredded the check into confetti. I let the pieces fall from my hand. They fluttered down like snow, landing on the table, landing on the floor, landing on my father's expensive shoes. "I am not the one who needs charity," I said, brushing a speck of paper from my sleeve. I pointed to Gavin, who was still sobbing on the floor. Then I pointed to Candace, who was staring at the wall in a catatonic state. "You are going to need a lot of money, Luther. Real money, not credit, not loans. Cash." I walked back to the head of the table and stood next to my father, speaking to him like an advisor speaking to a bankrupt client. "Gavin is facing federal charges for securities fraud and embezzlement. Do you know how much a good white-collar defense attorney charges? The retainer alone starts at 50 grand. And that is just to keep him out of maximum security." I looked at Candace. "And your golden child." She is facing an ethics investigation and potential larceny charges. She will need a separate legal team. That is another 50 grand, minimum. I turned back to my father. And you? You have 3 mortgages to service plus the penalties for the default I am about to trigger. You are looking at $500,000 just to keep the lights on for the next 6 months. My father looked at me with horror. He did not have that kind of money. He never had. He had spent it all on the image of having it. I do not have it, he whispered. Tasha. I do not have it. You know I do not. I smiled. It was the smile of the shark that Arthur Sterling had taught me to be. I know, I said, but I do. I leaned against the table, casual, relaxed, powerful. I have the cash, Dad. I have the liquidity to hire the best lawyers in Atlanta. I have the funds to pay off the fines. I could write a check right now that would make all of this go away. I could save Gavin from prison. I could save Candace's reputation. I could save this house. Hope flared in his eyes. A desperate, pathetic hope. You would do that, he asked. After everything, I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tried to send me to Arizona. No, I said. I wouldn't. I stood up straight and signaled to Arthur Sterling. I just wanted you to know that I could, I said. I wanted you to know that the daughter you called a failure is the only person on earth who could save you, and I wanted you to know that I am choosing not to. My father let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Why, he asked. Why are you doing this? Because I said, turning to walk away. You taught me that business comes before family. You taught me that image matters more than people. I am just following your example, Dad. I am cutting my losses. And right now this family is a loss I can no longer afford to carry. I walked back to my seat, leaving him standing in the confetti of his own worthless check. He was broken. He was bankrupt. And for the first time in his life he was completely powerless. The creditor had spoken, and the account was closed. I turned my back on my father, leaving him standing amidst the shredded remains of his $15,000 bribe. I walked back to my seat at the end of the table, the seat that had been assigned to the family outcast. It felt different now. It felt like a throne. I sat down and smoothed my napkin over my lap, signaling that as far as I was concerned, the conversation was over. But my mother, Catherine, was not ready to let the scene end. She was not ready to accept that her reign as the Queen of Atlanta society had just been terminated by her own daughter. She looked at my father, who was broken and silent. She looked at Gavin, who was still weeping on the floor. She looked at Candace, who was staring into the abyss of her ruined career. Desperation is a powerful drug. It can make arrogant people do humiliating things. My mother let out a low, keen sound. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap. She rushed toward me. Her heels clattered frantically on the hardwood floor. She did not stop when she reached my chair. She did not stand over me and demand obedience like she usually did. Instead, she sank to her knees. The sight of Catherine Robinson, the woman who claimed she would never bow to anyone, kneeling on the floor of her own dining room, was shocking. Her emerald green silk dress pooled around her, her expensive stockings snagged on the rug. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold and clammy, her grip surprisingly strong. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin, not in aggression this time, but in a frantic attempt to hold on to a lifeline. Tasha, she sobbed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and calculated performance. Tasha, baby, please. You cannot do this. You cannot be serious. Look at us. We are your family. We are your flesh and blood. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. Mascara ran in black rivets down her cheeks, making her look like a tragic clown. I am sorry, she wailed. I am so sorry for what I said earlier. I did not mean it. I was stressed. The magazine shoot the pressure, it just got to me. You know I love you. You know I want what is best for you. I was just trying to help you find your way. She squeezed my hand harder, trying to force a connection that had severed years ago. Please, Tasha. Do not kick us out. Do not take the house. Think about the neighbors. Think about the scandal. If the Millers next door see a moving truck, if they see the police. Oh God, I will never be able to show my face at the country club again. They will laugh at us. They will say we failed. I looked down at her. I watched her weep. I listened to her pleas. And all I felt was a profound, icy exhaustion. Even in her moment of total defeat, she was not worried about where she would sleep. She was not worried about her son-in-law going to prison. She was worried about the neighbors. She was worried about the country club. She was worried about her face. She was apologizing, yes. But she was apologizing for the consequences, not the cruelty. She was sorry she had lost, not that she had hurt me. I looked at her hand, gripping mine. It was the same hand that used to slap me when I stuttered as a child. It was the same hand that had pushed me away when I tried to hug her after my college graduation. It was the same hand that had pointed to the door just an hour ago and told me to leave. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my skin. I did it slowly, peeling them back one by one. "Don't touch me, Catherine," I said. My voice was quiet, but it silenced her sobbing instantly. I pushed her hand away. It fell limply to her side. "You are sorry?" I asked, looking down at her. "You are sorry because the check bounced. You are sorry because the power dynamic shifted. An hour ago, I was a flaw. I was a blemish. I was a mistake you wanted to erase. Now that I have the checkbook suddenly, I am your baby." I shook my head. "Save the acting for the jury, Mother. It is too late for an encore here." My mother slumped back on her heels, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. She realized the emotional manipulation wasn't working. She realized I was immune to her tears. "So what happens now?" she whispered. "Are you going to throw us on the street tonight? On Thanksgiving?" The room held its breath. The few remaining guests watched with morbid fascination. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I said calmly. "I have every legal right to evict you for cause immediately. You are trespassing on commercial property owned by Phantom Inc. Ventures. And considering the damage caused to the dining room floor by your son-in-law's tantrum, I could argue you are destroying assets." My mother flinched, but I continued, setting the glass down. "I am a businesswoman, and unlike you, I do not make decisions based on emotion. I make them based on strategy." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, looking down at her. "I will offer you a deal. A settlement, if you will." My mother's eyes lit up with pathetic hope. "A deal. What kind of deal?" I held up one finger. "First, I will not call the police on Candace tonight. I will hold the file on her campaign embezzlement. I won't send it to the district attorney. Yet." Candace, who had been staring at the wall, turned her head slowly. She looked like a ghost. Yet she whispered. I ignored her and focused on my mother. "I will keep that file in my safe. As insurance. As long as Candace resigns from the race quietly and pays back every cent she stole within 12 months, the file stays closed. If she steps out of line, if she tries to spin a story, if she ever mentions my name in public again, I press send." I held up a second finger. "Second, I won't throw you out tonight. I will give you 1 week. 7 days. You have 7 days to pack your personal effects. Not the furniture, not the art, not the silver. Those are assets of the estate and belong to me now. Just your clothes and your personal items." My mother nodded frantically. 7 days. "Okay, we can do 7 days. Thank you, Tasha. Thank you." I held up my hand to stop her gratitude. It made me nauseous. "I am not finished," I said. "There is a third condition, and this one is non-negotiable." "What is it?" she asked, breathless. "Anything. We will do anything." I looked around the dining room. I looked at the congealing turkey. I looked at the spilled wine. I looked at the faces of the people who had tormented me for 29 years. "I want this table," I said. My mother blinked. "The table." "I want this room," I clarified. "I want to finish my Thanksgiving dinner. But the atmosphere in here right now is toxic." It smells like desperation and cheap perfume. I stood up and pointed a steady finger toward the front door. The same door my father had tried to march me through earlier. The condition is that you leave. All of you. Right now. My mother looked confused. Leave? But you said we could stay for a week. You can stay in the guest house, I said coldly. Or you can go to a hotel. I don't care where you go as long as you are not in this house for the next 3 hours. I looked at my watch. My staff has been working very hard tonight. Mr. Sterling and his associates have been standing here for 20 minutes while you cried. They are hungry. I am hungry. And I intend to enjoy a nice, quiet Thanksgiving meal with the people who actually helped me build my empire. I gestured to the empty chairs around the table. The chairs occupied by my father, my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. Get up, I ordered. My father looked at me stunned. You are kicking us out of our own dinner. It is my dinner, Dad, I corrected him. I paid for it. Remember, I own the debt on the catering bill. I own the table. I own the chair you are sitting in. I clapped my hands once. Sharp, loud. Up. Now. My father slowly pushed his chair back. He looked like a beaten dog. He stood up, his legs shaking. Gavin scrambled up from the floor, wiping his nose on his sleeve. He didn't look at me. He just ran toward the door. Candace stood up like a zombie. She grabbed her purse and walked out without a word, her high heels dragging on the floor. My mother was the last to rise. She stood up from her knees, smoothing her ruined dress. She looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, only fear and hatred. I hope you are happy, Tasha, she whispered. I smiled, a genuine warm smile. I am Mother, I said. I am finally sitting at the head of the table. She turned and fled. I watched them go. I watched them herd themselves out of the dining room, a parade of failures. I heard the front door open and close. Silence descended on the room. Beautiful golden silence. I turned to Arthur Sterling, who was standing by the sideboard watching the scene with a faint smile. Mr. Sterling, I said, please sit down. I gestured to my father's empty chair at the head of the table. Would you like the dark meat or the white meat? Sterling chuckled and walked toward the table. I believe I will have the leg, Ms. Robinson. It seems appropriate given that you just cut theirs off. I sat back down. I picked up my wine glass. The air tasted cleaner. The food looked better. For the first time in my life, Thanksgiving felt like a holiday. I was home, and this time nobody could tell me I didn't belong. The silence in the dining room did not last long. As my parents and sisters stumbled toward the hallway, a strange phenomenon occurred among the guests. These were my father's friends, his golf buddies, his business partners, people who had eaten at his table for decades. Logic dictated that they should be outraged on his behalf. Logic dictated they should follow him out the door, offering support and solidarity. But power has a gravitational pull that is stronger than loyalty. Uncle Marcus, the man who had toasted my father's genius only 20 minutes ago, was the first to move. He did not chase after Luther. Instead, he walked slowly toward me. He reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a gold-embossed business card. He placed it gently on the table right next to the blue dossier. Tasha, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If Phantom Inc. is looking for legal representation for this new acquisition, my firm specializes in property law. We would be honored to work with you. I looked at him. I looked at the card. I didn't smile. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded once. That nod was all the permission the room needed. Suddenly, a line formed. One by one, the guests approached the head of the table where I was sitting. They didn't look at the empty chairs where my family had sat. They looked at me. They offered cards. They offered congratulations. They offered to introduce me to new investment opportunities. They were rats jumping from a sinking dinghy to a luxury liner. I took their cards. I collected them like trophies of war, not because I intended to call them, but because I wanted my father to know that I had taken his kingdom without firing a single shot. Eventually, they filtered out whispering excitedly about the gossip they would spread tomorrow. The room emptied until it was just me, Arthur Sterling, his team, and the security detail. Mr. Sterling checked his watch. The eviction timeline has begun. Mrs. Robinson, shall we supervise the exit? I stood up. I wanted to see this. I needed to see this. We walked to the foyer. The front door was wide open, letting in the cool night air. My family was clustered in the driveway, surrounded by 3 of Sterling's large, impassive security guards. They had been allowed to retrieve 1 suitcase each from their rooms. Just the essentials. No jewelry boxes, no paintings, no silverware. My mother was clutching a Louis Vuitton duffel bag, shivering in the night air. She wasn't wearing a coat. She had been too frantic to grab one. Gavin was pacing in circles, his tie undone, shouting into his phone, presumably trying to reach a lawyer who wouldn't pick up on Thanksgiving night. Candace was sitting on top of her suitcase, her face buried in her hands. But the real show was the neighborhood. In an affluent suburb like ours, silence is a luxury. But tonight, the street was alive. The shouting, the arrival of the security team, the sheer chaos of the Robinson household had drawn an audience. The neighbors, the people my mother had spent 40 years trying to impress, were standing on their porches. Some were pretending to walk their dogs. Others didn't even bother with the pretense. They stood by their manicured hedges, phones in hand, recording the downfall of the dynasty. I stepped out onto the porch. The porch light illuminated me like a spotlight. My father looked up and saw me. He stood by the trunk of his Mercedes, which was locked because I held the keys to the lease. "Tasha," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Open the garage. We need the car. You cannot expect us to walk." I leaned against the column of the porch, crossing my arms. "The lease on the Mercedes is in default," Luther Farsart called out. "The bank repossessed it, effective immediately. It stays here." "Uber is very reliable in this area," I added. "Although with surge pricing on a holiday, you might want to pool your money." "Oh, wait." My comment struck a match in a room filled with gasoline. The family turned on each other. "This is your fault," Gavin screamed, spinning around to point at Candace. "If you hadn't spent 50 grand on bags and trips, we would have cash reserves. You bled us dry." "Me," Candace shrieked, jumping up from her suitcase. "You stole $2 million, you idiot. You are the reason the feds are involved. You dragged me down with you." My mother joined the fray, shoving my father in the chest. "You told me you had it handled, Luther. You told me the refinancing was just for tax purposes. You lied to me. You lost my house. I didn't lose it." My father yelled back, humiliated that the neighbors were hearing every word. "Your daughter stole it. She tricked us." They were screaming over each other, a cacophony of blame and hatred. It was ugly. It was loud. It was the truth they had been hiding for years, finally vomiting out onto the pavement. I saw Mrs. Miller from next door zooming in with her iPhone. I saw the flash of cameras. Candace saw them too. She pulled her jacket over her head, trying to hide her face, trying to block out the reality that she was tomorrow's viral video. The golden child was now the laughingstock. I watched them for another minute. I watched the people who had made me feel small for my entire life shrink, until they were nothing but angry, desperate figures arguing in a driveway. They looked like strangers. "Close the gate," I said to the security guards standing near the control panel. The heavy iron gates of the estate began to swing shut. My family heard the mechanical whine and scrambled. They grabbed their suitcases and ran toward the gap, terrified of being trapped inside, terrified of facing me again. They slipped through the closing gates just in time. The metal bars clanged shut with a final, resonant boom. I stood there for a moment looking at the empty driveway. The shouting continued on the other side of the gate, fading as they walked down the street, dragging their luggage, looking for a ride that wouldn't come. I took a deep breath of the cool autumn air. It smelled of fallen leaves and victory. I turned around and walked back into my house. The dining room was quiet now. The chaos had been scrubbed away by the silence. Arthur Sterling was sitting at the table, casually reviewing a document. He looked up as I entered. The perimeter is secure, Ms. Robinson, he said. The locks are being changed as we speak. Thank you, Arthur, I said. I walked to the table. The half-eaten turkey was still there. The spilled wine was still staining the cloth. But it didn't look like a mess to me anymore. It looked like art. I sat down at the head of the table, my father's chair. It was more comfortable than I expected. I saw the wine bottle Gavin had ordered. A vintage Bordeaux. It was nearly full. I picked it up and poured a generous amount into my father's crystal goblet. The dark red liquid swirled against the glass. I took a sip. It was rich, complex, and tasted faintly of oak and berries. But mostly it tasted like ownership. Gavin had ordered it to celebrate his ego. I was drinking it to celebrate his eviction. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flight itinerary my father had given me. The one-way ticket to Arizona. The symbol of my banishment. I looked at the candle flickering in the center of the table. I held the corner of the paper to the flame. The fire caught instantly. The paper curled and blackened. I watched the words Phoenix and Economy Class turn to ash. I dropped the burning paper onto an empty plate and watched it crumble until it was nothing but gray dust. I reached for my phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Hello? A sleepy voice answered. It was my publicist. Wake up, Sarah, I said. I have a job for you. Tasha. It is Thanksgiving. Is everything okay? Everything is perfect, I said. I want you to draft a press release. Send it to the Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Black Enterprise. Okay, what is the headline? Tell them that the anonymous author of The Glass Ceiling and Shadow Capital is ready to reveal her identity, I said. Tell them her name is Natasha Robinson, and tell them she is available for interviews starting Monday. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. You are finally coming out. I am, I said. And Sarah. One more thing. Call the real estate agent. I want to list the Buckhead estate for sale first thing in the morning. You are selling the house, but you just... I looked around the opulent dining room. I looked at the portraits of my ancestors on the walls, people who would have been ashamed of what this family had become. I said. The feng shui is terrible here. It has too many ghosts. I want to buy something modern, something with a view, something that doesn't smell like old lies. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked over to the camera that had been recording this entire confession. I looked directly into the lens, breaking the fourth wall, looking right at you. My parents wanted me to disappear. They gave me money to vanish. And in a way, I did exactly what they asked. I smiled. I disappeared from the narrative they wrote for me. I disappeared from the role of the victim. I disappeared from the burden of carrying their secrets. I raised the wine glass to the camera. They thought exile was a punishment. They didn't know that sometimes leaving is the only way to arrive. I am Tasha Robinson. I am the CEO of Phantom Inc. And I am finally done being the family failure. I took one last sip of the wine. Cheers. I set the glass down on the table. Clink. The screen fades to black. The most profound lesson from my journey is that being underestimated is a superpower. While my family was obsessed with the illusion of success, I was quietly building the reality of it. We are often taught that family loyalty requires endless sacrifice, but I learned that biology is not a suicide pact. You do not owe your dignity to anyone, even if you share their DNA. True power comes when you stop begging for a seat at a table where you are not respected and build your own instead. My silence was never weakness. It was a strategy to outgrow them. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace, type I choose me in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of resilience.